Welcome to Richard and Greg, a channel dedicated to discussion, debate and argument on a whole array of topics. In today's video, we discuss with Greg his view on the proposed coronavirus vaccines mooted by Moderna and Pfizer, and obtain his view as to whether they are likely to be effective, especially considering an environment where mutations are indeed quite likely, as witnessed by previous viruses experienced throughout history. We also ask him if he would be one of the first to take such a vaccine, and if so, why? So let's go over to that discussion right now. Welcome to Richard and Greg. The time is just after midday on Wednesday, the 18th of November, 2020. And it's been a while, but we're going to talk to Greg, particularly about the coronavirus figures. Now, one has to admit, worldwide, they do not look good. With in excess of 1.3 million deaths and 56 million cases, one has to ask, where will this all end? And who better to ask than the doom-monger himself, who said many, many months ago that the figures would roll into the multiple millions. Greg, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Sadly, it looks as if I am slowly and inexorably being proved right. One thing that deeply worries me at the moment is politicians around the world and so-called experts saying that we will have a working vaccination by Christmas or in the new year, or, well, when might we have a working vaccination against the virus when we've been trying to find a vaccination against a mutating virus for at least 70 years, and we haven't found a single solitary way of producing one? I just find it incredibly hard to believe people saying we will have a vaccine against it. Yes, we might have a vaccine against it for the very brief window of this very specific mutation of the coronavirus, but it mutates overnight. We have already had several mutations of COVID-19. One is being nicknamed, for lack of a better word, as long COVID. People who get the virus and take literally months to recover. Of those that survive, others survive rapidly. Others invent symptoms and make a big thing of having had it when one questions if they ever had it in the first place. This is going on all the time. How can we believe the politicians if they cannot explain how they are going to come up with this virus vaccination? Personally, I can't see it happening. We have a flu jab on a regular basis in this country, many of us. It's not a flu vaccination. It is injection with last year's type of flu, the mutation from last year, which is in a weak solution, providing you with antibodies that, if this year's mutation is similar, will mean that you only get this year's mutation mildly. And it seems like a bit of a cold. But if it's a large mutation, it won't touch it, which is why every so often we have a year, despite flu jabs, where the number of flu deaths is markedly higher than other years. I seem to recall there was a year in the 60s when that happened, and another year in the 80s. But don't quote me on that. I haven't looked up the stats. But reverting to how many people have had the disease in any given country, I do believe that the only figure that has any meaningful information to give us is the deaths per million, where the UK has had 775 deaths per million, and the USA has had 767. But there is again a great flaw in this when you think that San Marino has had 1,237 deaths per million. But they've only got a population of 33,000. So it's very easy to make a snap judgment on, wow, they've got a high death rate. Yes, they have, but they've hardly got any people. Sweden is in much the same position, where with a very small population, they have had a very small number of deaths. But not such a small number when you start looking at it as per million. India has a very low per million figure, but then again, who is recording deaths in rural India, where they have a population of 1.3 billion?
Okay, Greg, if I stop you there for just a second, I fully take that point.
You can take
Going back to the vaccine, you've got a company like Moderna claiming that they've created something that could be 92% effective, and Pfizer 90% effective or more. And one has to ask, obviously, they can only deal with the virus as it is now, as you correctly say. Surely it does give some hope that at least this virus, to a large extent, can be, let's use the word, curtailed, so that people can go about their daily lives. Does it not suggest that?
Indeed, it does. However, it only suggests it until the next mutation comes along. And they do seem to be a little bit like buses when you look at it, because we had SARS, MERS, and N1, H1, or whatever it was. And they all came along at once. We've already had COVID-19 and long COVID that are being remarked by medical experts, and that's within a year. So yes, their vaccine may work for this immediate pandemic, but the fractional mutation, does it work for that? And when you think that there is now a new mutation, which has come up in Denmark, because the Danish fur industry keep mink in very close quarters in cages, and COVID-19 spread from human beings into the mink, and then mutated because it was in the mink, and there are some 12 cases of a completely new COVID type coronavirus that has been handed back by the mink to people. As a result, in Denmark, they are killing 14 million mink, wiping out their entire stock, breeding animals and all. They will probably get huge compensation for this because it's their business. However, I do notice that all of the mink that are being slaughtered, and it would appear all 14 million of them are being treated and handled in exactly the same way as they would be to be turned into fur coats. So I presume there's going to be a glut of mink fur coats selling in the 5 and dime stores rather than Fifth Avenue. It's not as simple as a vaccine being created. We've been trying for years to find a vaccine for the common cold, but it keeps on fractionally mutating. We've wanted a vaccine for flu, but it keeps on mutating. I don't think we're going to get a lasting vaccine. I think that we're going to have to come to terms with the fact that this coronavirus is now in a period of mutations, various mutations, that are worse than they have been for many years. We have been incredibly fortunate so far in that only a very small percentage of the population and a small percentage even of those who have contracted the virus have actually died of the virus. And many of those people have been amongst those who are prone to, their immune system is weakened and they're prone to disease, namely the elderly in large percentage of cases, particularly with lung diseases or heart diseases. I think the mutations are going to be something we have to come to terms with. And I think over the years, those mutations will, as I predicted right at the beginning when this particular virus was first being discussed, there is a possibility that it could go on as a higher than flu level virus that would kill more and more people until we reached into the multiple millions over the next 2 or 3 years. Let's not forget that in killing 50 to 100 million people, the coronavirus known as Spanish flu of 1917, 1918 and 1919 killed 50 to 100 million people and then died out naturally. We have known that this could happen again, and we have had medical research constantly looking ever since that event 100 years ago for ways to deal with the next pandemic, and they failed. They haven't found a virus, vaccine that copes with a mutating virus. I personally think COVID-19 in this particular collection of strains will probably be around for another 5 years or so as it fades out. And it will possibly fade out slightly accelerated by what will be passed off as a vaccine.
Okay, Greg. Now, let's assume, because it does appear that in spite of what you've said, it does appear that even the drug companies are saying that a vaccine will be available before the end of the year. Of course, they cannot produce enough to inoculate the majority of the public in that time. But even people like Dr. Fauci is saying that he sees no reason why you cannot, certainly in the Western world, have almost complete vaccinations or inoculations by the end of next year. Would you be one of the first to take such a vaccine, or would you be tempted to delay it until you found out what the side effects were going to be first?
I will be first in the queue. And I'm fortunate that I probably will be in this country. Because I am part of a survey with the Office of National Statistics. I have had weekly swabs to establish whether I have caught COVID. I am now reduced after 5 weeks. I'm on monthly swabs for at least the next year. Therefore, if a vaccine comes along, I think I'd probably, because they've got a track record of me, be well placed in that queue, and also because I'm in an at-risk category, both because of my age and because of heavy-duty chemotherapy. My immune system is not what it might be. And also because I have had a massive heart attack that they have been able to do nothing about except feed me pills, because it isn't as simple as putting a stent or a bypass in. They cannot dyno-rod my heart, unfortunately, without the risk of breaking through the side of the heart and me bleeding out before they can do anything about it. So they've left well alone. So I'm in a high risk situation, but that's life. Eventually you reach the high risk bracket. But do bear in mind, if you make it to 90, you are less likely to die than a 20-year-old. For the simple reason there are so few 90-year-olds around, but that's how to lie with statistics.
Well, let's hope you do live to 90, otherwise this channel would end prematurely, Greg. But that aside, you can see I'm all heart. Do you not think you perhaps could be accused of being a little hypocritical? Because you've basically said the vaccine will be no good because the coronavirus has all these mutations. And then you've turned around and said, but you'll be the first in the queue. You can't blame someone for thinking,
I want the penny and the bun. I'm perfectly happy with that. That's not hypocritical. I don't think it'll be any good. But I won't turn it down if it's offered, because it might be.
But do you not think, and I think this is a very fair accusation, really. Normally, when a drug is invented, it takes many, many years for it to undergo the various trials and peer reviews, etc., etc. This, produced by Moderna and Pfizer, seems to have only been developed in the last couple of months, and they're talking about rolling it out by Christmas. Are you not even in the slightest bit concerned that perhaps it will come out too soon before they really know what the potential side effects of taking this drug will be?
I would be very concerned if I was 20. What have I got to lose? I have everything to gain at my stage in life at 74. And at the very worst scenario that it causes morbidity, I will have lost very little relative to the 20-year-olds. Now, that is selfish, isn't it? But I'm perfectly happy to be one of those who takes the risk on the basis that the risk will have been curtailed as far as they can. It is not like, for instance, as I heard quoted by somebody the other day, but even with the proper research in place, look what happened with thalidomide because it wasn't adequately researched. No, it's not remotely the same. The reason being, we do understand vaccines. We may not be able to produce a vaccine for given items, but we do understand them. We are not introducing something that has fatal side effects. I say we're not. One must have some faith in medicine. We have made quite a lot of progress in the 50 years since thalidomide was on the market. Now, don't forget, that is 50 years ago. Actually, it might be more than that. It was about 1956, wasn't it? So it's 60 years ago that thalidomide was on the market. Medical research has made a great deal of progress in that period. And thalidomide was the introduction of a chemical to reduce morning sickness with pregnant women that had a completely unforeseen side effect. A vaccine is not similar. It is not in the same style of drug whatsoever. And the big problems have in the main come with things like thalidomide and other drugs administered to particularly pregnant women. There are a few that have been administered to people, again, drugs rather than vaccines, that have had deleterious effects on people with heart conditions. But that's a matter of you're being kept alive with one drug and they're trying another and it didn't work, oh dear, which is a little different.
Okay, Greg. Well, I want to add, obviously, in order to ensure that we remain within legal confines, neither of us are medical practitioners or have degrees in medicine, though perhaps you've had a lot of medical practitioners work on you. So these are just our opinions. So we want to make that clear. But having said that, based on your opinion, you indicated that you would take it now unhesitatingly. But that's because you're not 20 years old. Are you suggesting, therefore, 20-year-olds shouldn't take it? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm making the comment cynically and tongue-in-cheek. I would recommend that if your government, and you consider your government a responsible government, which by and large I do with the British government, I would suggest that if they are prepared to put it on the market, it's jumped through adequate hoops for that. Yes, there will be a risk, but I believe it will be a lesser risk than catching COVID and dying of it.
And how do you answer the question, though, that so many people have caught COVID and haven't died from it? So is the vaccine really that important?
I believe the vaccine is that important if it's 100% successful, because it'll mean the others didn't die either.
Okay, and finally then, before we go, there is a view out there, and it is a view that is perhaps growing, I would argue, in terms of popularity, that to a large extent, this COVID-19 issue is to some degree made up, because if you actually have a look at the number of declared influenza cases and deaths, they seem to have dropped dramatically in the year when the number of COVID cases and deaths have risen, thereby suggesting that perhaps it's nowhere near as bad as people are trying to make it out to be. Now, there are some off the wall who say it's completely fake. Now, I don't think any reasonable person would think it's fake, but it does require some investigation as to whether it is actually hyped up far more than what it really is. What's your view on that?
I think that the people who aren't dying of influenza in statistical terms are amongst those who have been bracketed as dying of COVID, because many of the symptoms are very similar. And it would be very easy alongside each other, without doing massive biopsies everywhere, to class them the same. And you'll probably find that the influenza this year is more akin to COVID-19 and harder to differentiate.
Okay. Well, Greg, thank you very much. It's fascinating to get your view on this and to sort of, I suppose, take into account what you're going through personally, as well as many hundreds of thousands of other people. So the bottom line is, yes, when the vaccines come out, and if you're frail and elderly, by all means, take it. And if you're not, then make a judgment, but you would err on the side of caution. That's your view. Is that a fair assessment?
I would say so. But the one thing that I would strenuously divert from people from is the belief that it has been deliberately engineered to reset economies and deliberately engineered to have an excuse to inject people with chips, which are amongst the idiot conclusions. And the reason why I cannot believe in these conspiracies has become more obvious recently, when we realize that the entire machinery of American government cannot coordinate an election without it being called into question. If they can't organize that, and those are supposedly your government, then I would hazard a guess that it would be very difficult to get them to coordinate something as complex as a conspiracy, because they're all so busy stabbing each other in the back that they really haven't got time to try and work out even the most simple of conspiracies.
I think that's a logical conclusion, I have to admit. Although there have been, and there have been conspiracies proven, but undertaken by the CIA, certainly not on this scale, but there have been some. So you can't rule it out entirely, but I take your point, Greg.
Oh, okay. You can't rule out conspiracies if you've ever been in a children's playground. Mankind is prone to endless conspiracies. It's whether they can organize a complex conspiracy that I call into question. They cannot even decide between them, without squabbling like ferrets in a sack, whether to pull out or put in more troops into Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yes, well, that could be a topic of another discussion, because as we have seen, President Trump has now stated yesterday, I believe, or his Secretary of Defense has stated that they're going to pull troops out of Afghanistan and Iraq. Sorry?
His temporary
Secretary
of Defense, because he fired his last one, and if this one it doesn't say what Trump wants, I presume he'll be fired as well.
Indeed, as many of them are finding out. Greg, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if so, kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell sign so that you are notified of our videos as and when they are published. And also in the description box below, we place links to certain books, articles and programs which you may find of benefit, and for which we will receive a small commission should you purchase through our link. And this will help support our channel and to enable us to develop it further.